Hello and welcome back to Cinema 104 Film History. So now we're coming into the 60s, and I've labeled this the Boomer era because this is when the boomers born through the 40s and 50s are starting to come of age and exert their influence on society and also on movies, of course. So the early 60s is very prosperous. This is the salad days for America. It's really the good old days. And JFK is elected, a young, attractive president. There's a lot of optimism. The pill is introduced, which officially kind of ends the baby boom. Once it becomes commercially available, it's the first oral contraceptive, and women now have control of the birth process, and we see a drop off, a decline in births, and that's the end of the boom and the boomer era. Although this is when their influence with movies is beginning as they get older. So, this also brings us into the bloated era in Hollywood. So while the nation is very prosperous and doing well, Hollywood is going through some difficulties. There's a decline in attendance, and a lot of their old style movies are not working. They made a lot of westerns in the early 60s, and the young people just weren't as attracted to them. So through this period, they begin to shift their focus ever more to younger and younger audiences because that's who's going to the movies. Also, in this time period, we have the JFK assassination in 1963. Now, this really rocks the nation. It's the death of a very popular president under dubious circumstances, and it throws a little bit of a pall on the American experiment. Like, wow, can that happen here? And we begin to see that show up in movies. Just that very same year, or just shortly after the assassination, we see the release of Doctor Strangelove, and this is a film that's mocking the Cold War, sort of making fun of all the tension and the hysteria around it, and it succeeds, which is pretty amazing. It means that Americans are ready to laugh about something that for years sort of hung over their heads. Okay. It also introduces a larger audience to Stanley Kubrick, who is, one of America's great master directors. And we'll see another film from him later in the class. Also, we see the rise of the civil rights movement. It's been going on through the 50s. It grows in strength and in popularity and support through the 60s. We see the rise of Martin Luther King, and this manifests in Hollywood in the form of films like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which deals with the interracial relationship. So this film really ties in very nicely to Get Out, which we'll watch later in the class. Okay. Also, it premieres, not premiere rather, it features Sidney Poitier, a great and very important leading man from the 60s, who the first African American to win the Best Picture Oscar. Okay. Um, and he represents a change that we begin to see in leading men. They aren't sort of the rock-jawed, strong alpha male types. We see different types of personalities, different ethnicities represented. Also, we have Psycho, very important film, and Alfred Hitchcock's most successful film, and it really gives us modern horror. This is the film that transforms horror from being say, a monster film about a creature attacking people to being a threat that's next door, a killer among us. And it gives us a lot of our modern horror tropes like Final Girl, the slasher films that are very popular with teens today. It all starts with Psycho. And it hints that the world that we're moving into in the 60s maybe isn't as safe as the sort of idealized 50s. Lastly, I want to mention the influence of the French New Wave, and we won't see that influence in America really until next class. But in the late 50s and early 60s, another international movement emerged which had influence on American films. Earlier, it was Italian neorealism in the 50s, and now in the 60s, we'll see the influence of the French New Wave, which is a very avant garde, unique style of filmmaking that didn't follow Hollywood's formal rules. They broke the rules. They were like the rock and roll of filmmaking. Okay, they were rough and tumble, and the kids loved it. And we'll see that influence next class. So enjoy the lecture, I hope. And if you have any questions, reach out.